had been a cultural liaison for the collective for more than 40 cycles. She had traveled to distant worlds and studied dozens of alien species. She had learned their languages, recorded their customs, and listened to their stories. Every species she met believed they were special. Every species told grand tales about their ancestors. They claimed their ancient warriors could move mountains with their bare hands. They said their soldiers once fought for 20 days without food or water. Had heard it all before. She knew that every civilization exaggerated its history. It was natural. It was expected. It was how weak creatures made themselves feel strong. So when her superiors told her she would be stationed aboard a human vessel, she felt no excitement. Humans were a young species. They had only been part of the galactic community for a few decades. Their technology was average. They were short. Their bodies were soft and fragile, expected them to be like all the others. She expected tall tailies and empty boasts. The ship was called the Gallant Hope. It was a medium-sized vessel designed for diplomacy and transport, arrived on a cold morning and was greeted by a human officer named Danny. He was young by human standards, with brown hair and an easy smile. He shook her hand in the human way and welcomed her aboard. "We are honored to have you with us, Ambassador," Danny said. "Captain Palmer asked me to show you around and help you get settled." Followed him through the ship. The corridors were narrow compared to vessels. The lights were bright and warm. Everywhere she looked, she saw humans working, talking, and laughing. They seemed cheerful for a species that lived such brief lives. Danny introduced her to the crew as they walked. She met engineers and doctors and soldiers. They all smiled and shook her hand. They all seemed genuinely happy to meet her. It was strange. Most species treated diplomats with caution and formality. These humans acted like she was an old friend. That evening, dined with the senior officers. Captain Greg Palmer sat at the head of the table. He was an older man with gray hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. His face looked tired but kind. He spoke with a calm, steady voice that commanded respect without demanding it. "Tell me, Ambassador," Palmer said as they ate, "what do you know about humanity so far?" Considered her words carefully. "I know your species is young. I know you have spread quickly across many star systems. I know you have fought several wars, both among yourselves and against other species." Palmer nodded. "That is all true. What else?" "I have read some of your history files. Your legends are quite impressive." A few of the officers exchanged glances. Danny leaned forward with interest. "Which legends?" he asked. Pulled up her data pad. There was one about a battle called Thermopylae, 300 soldiers against an army of over 1 million. They fought to the last man to protect their homeland. She looked around the table. "It is a powerful story." "It is not just a story," said a woman sitting across from her. Her name was Bate Harmon and she was the chief engineer. She had short red hair and grease stains on her fingers. "It really happened." Allowed herself a polite smile. "Of course, I did not mean to offend. All species have their founding myths." The table went quiet for a moment. Captain Palmer watched her with an expression she could not read. "You think we are exaggerating," he said. It was not a question. Hesitated. She did not want to insult her hosts, but she also believed in honesty. "I think all species tend to make their ancestors seem greater than they were. It is a natural tendency. Humans are no different." Palmer did not argue. He simply nodded and returned to his meal. Over the next few weeks, collected more stories. Danny told her about a place called Alamo, where a small group of fighters held a fort against thousands of enemies. Bates spoke of something called Stalingrad, where humans fought in frozen ruins for months, eating rats and refusing to surrender a single building. A Marine named Briggs told her about a soldier who carried wounded men through enemy fire for hours, ignoring his own injuries until everyone was safe. The stories were always the same. Impossible odds, unbreakable courage, sacrifice beyond reason. Listened and nodded and took careful notes. She thanked them for sharing their culture, and every night when she returned to her quarters, she laughed quietly to herself. The humans were dreamers, that was clear. They had built an entire mythology around the idea that their species was somehow special. They believed they were tougher than other races, braver than other races, more willing to die for their beliefs. It was charming in a way. It was also completely absurd. Had seen true warriors. She had studied the whose soldiers were born with armored scales and venomous claws. She had observed the who could regenerate lost limbs in a matter of hours. Compared to such species, humans were nothing. They were soft. They were slow. They broke easily and healed slowly. The idea that they could perform the feats described in their legends was laughable. One evening, Captain Palmer found her alone on the observation deck. She was watching the stars drift past, lost in thought. He stood beside her in comfortable silence for a long moment. "You still do not believe us," he said finally. Turned to look at him. "I mean no disrespect, Captain. Your people are kind and welcoming, but I have studied many species. I know how legends work. They grow larger with each telling. The truth becomes hidden beneath layers of exaggeration." Palmer smiled slightly. "Maybe you are right, or maybe someday you will see for yourself." "See what?" "What humans are capable of when everything is on the line." Did not know how to respond. She thought he was being dramatic. She thought he was playing a role, acting like the hero from one of his own stories. She would learn soon enough that Greg Palmer did not play roles. He simply was what he appeared to be. And so were the rest of his crew. But that lesson would come later, written in fire and blood and sacrifice. For now, simply smiled and returned her gaze to the stars, confident in her understanding of the universe and her place within it. She had no idea how wrong she was. The attack came without warning on a quiet afternoon. Was in her quarters reviewing cultural notes when the ship shook violently. Alarms began screaming through the corridors. Red lights flashed on every wall. She grabbed the edge of her desk to steady herself as the floor tilted beneath her feet. The intercom crackled to life. Captain Palmer's voice filled the room, calm and cold. "All hands to battle stations. 3 warships have dropped out of hyperspace. They are moving to intercept. This is not a drill." Felt her blood turn to ice. She knew everyone in the galaxy knew they were raiders and slavers. They attacked ships, killed the crews they did not need, and sold the survivors to the highest bidder. They were brutal, efficient, and completely without mercy. She rushed to the bridge as fast as her legs could carry her. When she arrived, she found the command crew already at their stations. Danny was at the communications panel. Bate Harmon was monitoring the engineering systems. Captain Palmer stood in the center of it all, his eyes fixed on the 3 massive warships hung in the void before them. They were hunter vessels, bristling with weapons and covered in the scars of 100 battles. Each one was nearly twice the size of the Gallant Hope. "Captain," said, her voice shaking, "we must surrender. We cannot fight 3 warships. It is suicide." Palmer did not look at her. "We are carrying medical supplies to the colony on 4. If we surrender, they will take those supplies. Then they will go to 4 and take whatever else they want. There are 12,000 civilians on that colony. But we will die." Now Palmer turned. His eyes were hard and bright. "Maybe, but those colonists will live. My crew knows what they signed up for." Looked around the bridge. She expected to see fear. She expected to see despair. Instead, she saw something she did not understand. The humans were afraid. She could see it in their eyes and the tension of their shoulders. But beneath the fear was something else, something fierce and unbreakable. They were not going to run. They opened fire. The Gallant Hope shuddered as energy beams tore into her hull. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. Smoke filled the air, but the humans did not panic. They fought back with everything they had. Danny coordinated communications between the different sections of the ship. Bate rerouted power to the shields and weapons. Palmer gave orders in a voice that never wavered, even as the deck shook beneath his feet. For 20 minutes the battle raged. The Gallant Hope was smaller and weaker than any of the ships, but she was faster and more agile. Palmer used every advantage he had. He twisted and turned through the enemy formation, landing hits where he could, avoiding the worst of the incoming fire. But it was not enough. There were too many and too strong. The first breach came on Deck 7. Boarding pods punched through the hull and disgorged warriors into the corridors. Watched the security feeds in horror. There were massive creatures, nearly 3 meters tall, with thick gray skin and 4 powerful arms. Each one carried weapons that could tear through steel. The human Marines met them head-on. Could not believe what she was seeing. The Marines were so small compared to they should have been crushed in seconds. Instead, they formed a wall of bodies and weapons in the narrow corridor and refused to give ground. She watched a young Marine named Briggs take the lead position. He was the same man who had told her stories about human soldiers carrying the wounded through fire. Now, he was living that story himself. A warrior charged at him with a massive blade, fired his rifle until it was almost on top of him. Then he dropped the weapon and pulled out a knife. The struck him 3 times with its weapon, saw the impacts tear through his armor. She saw blood spray across the wall, but did not fall. He drove his knife into his throat with both hands and twisted. The creature collapsed, stood over it for a moment, swaying on his feet, then turned to face the next enemy. He killed 2 more before his body finally gave out. On another deck, Bait Harmon was not even a soldier. She was an engineer. But when the breach near the medical bay, she sealed herself inside a corridor junction. She held the blast door controls with her own hands, keeping it closed while the medical staff evacuated the wounded. They tried to cut through. Bait held on. When the door finally gave way, she was still standing there, still fighting, using a welding torch as a weapon. She did not survive, but neither did the who killed her. Watched all of this from the bridge monitors. Tears streamed down her face without her realizing it. She had studied dozens of species. She had heard thousands of legends. She had never seen anything like this. The humans were dying. They knew they were dying, and they kept fighting anyway. Captain Palmer stood at his station throughout the battle. When a console exploded near him, he simply moved to another one. When reports of casualties came in, he acknowledged them with a steady voice and continued giving orders. He never shouted. He never wavered. He simply did what needed to be done. The battle lasted 2 hours. When it was over, 2 of the 3 warships were crippled and drifting. The third was retreating at full speed, trailing smoke and fire. The Gallant Hope floated in space, wounded and bleeding atmosphere from a dozen holes in her hull. But she was still there, still intact, still free. Stood on the bridge in stunned silence. They showed the retreating ship growing smaller and smaller until it vanished into hyperspace. "Damage report," Palmer said quietly. Danny's voice was hoarse. 17 dead, 32 wounded, hull breaches on decks 4, 7, and 12. Engines are at 40%. Life support is holding for now. Palmer closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were wet. "Get the wounded to medical, seal the breaches, begin recovery operations for our fallen." He turned and saw standing there, staring at him. "Now do you understand?" he asked. Could not speak, she could only nod. She understood nothing, and she understood everything. The legends were not exaggerations, they were not myths, they were memories, they were warnings. And she had just watched new legends being born. The hours after the battle were the longest of life. She walked through the corridors of the Gallant Hope in a daze. The ship looked like a wounded animal. The walls were scorched black from weapons fire. The floors were slick with blood, both red and purple. Emergency lights flickered in damaged sections. The air smelled of smoke and death. Everywhere she looked, she saw humans working. They moved with purpose despite their exhaustion. Engineers sealed hull breaches with welding equipment. Medical teams carried stretchers through the narrow passageways. Soldiers helped each other limp toward the infirmary. Nobody was standing still. Nobody was giving up. Found herself in the cargo bay without quite knowing how she got there. The large open space had been converted into a temporary morgue. 17 body bags lay in a neat row along the far wall. Each bag contained a human who had been alive just hours ago. Each bag contained a story that would never be finished. Captain Palmer sat on a cargo crate near the bodies. His uniform was torn and stained with blood. A white bandage was wrapped around his left arm. He was staring at the row of bags with empty eyes. Approached slowly and lowered herself onto a crate beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "I knew every one of them," Palmer said finally. His voice was rough and tired. Briggs was 24 years old. He was supposed to get married next month. His is waiting for him back on Earth. Did not know what to say. She had seen death before. She had witnessed battles and their aftermath, but she had never felt it like this. Bait Harmon had a daughter, Palmer continued. 7 years old. Bait talked about her all the time. She was going to teach her to be an engineer when the girl got older. He fell silent again, watched his face. She saw grief there, deep and genuine, but she also saw something else, something she did not expect. "Pride." "I do not understand," she said quietly. "You won the battle, you saved the ship, you protected the colony. Why are you so sad?" Palmer looked at her with surprise. "Because they are dead. 17 of my people are gone forever. How could I not be sad?" "But you won." "Winning is not the point." Palmer shook his head slowly. "These were not just soldiers to me. They were family. I ate meals with them. I celebrated their birthdays. I listened to their problems. and now they are gone and I will never see them again. Struggled to understand. In the collective, soldiers were honored for their sacrifice. Their deaths were seen as a fair trade for victory. Grief was considered a weakness, a sign that one valued individuals over the greater good. Then why do you fight? She asked. If the cost hurts you so much, why not surrender? Why not save yourself and your crew? Palmer was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. There are things worse than death, Ambassador. Slavery is worse than death. Watching innocent people suffer is worse than death. Living with the knowledge that you could have helped but chose not to is worse than death. He gestured toward the row of body bags. These men and women understood that. They knew the risks when they put on the uniform. They knew they might die, and they served anyway because they believed in something bigger than themselves. What did they believe in? Each other, the people back home, the idea that the galaxy should be a place where the strong protect the weak instead of preying on them. Palmer's eyes grew distant. My species has not always lived up to those ideals. We have made terrible mistakes. We have hurt each other in ways that still shame us, but we keep trying. We keep reaching for something better, and sometimes that means being willing to die for it. Thought about her own training. She had been taught to observe and analyze. She had been taught to understand other species without becoming emotionally involved. She had been taught that objectivity was the highest virtue. But sitting here, surrounded by the dead, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt connected to these strange, fragile creatures. She felt their pain as if it were her own. I laughed at your legends, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. When Danny and Bate told me about Thermopylae and Stalingrad, I thought they were exaggerating. I thought you were making yourself seem greater than you really were. Palmer said nothing, he just waited. I was wrong, looked at the body bags. I watched your people fight today. I saw kill 3 enemies after he was already dying. I saw Bate hold a door closed with her bare hands to save strangers she had never met. I saw things I cannot explain. She turned to face Palmer. Your legends are not exaggerations. They are true, all of them. Palmer smiled sadly. Some of them are true, some are exaggerated. That is how stories work. But the spirit behind them is real. The willingness to sacrifice, to endure, to keep fighting when all hope seems lost. That is real. Why? What makes your species this way? I do not know. Maybe it is because our lives are short, so we want them to mean something. Maybe it is because we are weak, so we have to be brave to survive. Maybe it is just who we are. He stood slowly, his injured arm hanging at his side. We are going to hold a memorial service tomorrow. The whole crew will gather to honor the fallen. You are welcome to attend if you wish. Nodded, I will be there. Palmer began walking toward the exit. Then he stopped and looked back. Ambassador, I want you to understand something. What happened today was not special. It was not extraordinary. Every human ship in the fleet would have done the same thing. Every human crew would have made the same choice. Stared at him. This is who we are, Palmer said. This is what we do. We fight for each other. We die for each other. And when we fall, others rise to take our place. He walked out of the cargo bay, leaving alone with the dead. She sat there for a long time, thinking about everything she had seen and heard. She thought about her reports to the council. She thought about how she had described humanity as a young and unremarkable species. She had been so wrong, so completely, utterly wrong. And she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The gallant Hope limped through space for 3 weeks before reaching the nearest. The engines were badly damaged. The hull was patched with emergency seals. Half the systems ran on backup power. But the ship kept moving, carrying its wounded crew towards safety. During those weeks, Barely left the ship's archive room. The archive was a small space filled with computer terminals and holographic displays. It contained the complete historical records of human civilization. Had glanced at these files before the battle, but she had not truly studied them. She had assumed they would be filled with the same exaggerations she had heard from Danny and Bate and the others. Now she knew better. Now she wanted to understand. She started with the Battle of Thermopylae, the story Danny had told her on her first day aboard. She read the accounts carefully. She studied the numbers. 300 Spartan soldiers had indeed held a mountain pass against a Persian army of over 100,000 warriors. They had fought for 3 days. They had killed thousands of enemies before falling. And when they died, their sacrifice had given their time to prepare a defense that eventually saved their civilization. The story was real, every word of it. Moved on to other battles. She read about a place called Drift, where 150 human soldiers defended a small building against 4,000 enemy warriors for 12 hours. She read about the Alamo, where fewer than 200 fighters held a fort against an army for 13 days. She read about Bostonia, where surrounded soldiers in freezing weather refused to surrender despite having no hope of rescue. The pattern was always the same: impossible odds, stubborn resistance, sacrifice beyond reason. But the battles were only part of the story. Discovered that humans did not reserve their courage for war. She found records of doctors who walked into plague zones to treat the sick. She found stories of firefighters who entered burning buildings to save strangers. She found accounts of ordinary people who jumped into frozen rivers to rescue drowning children. One story haunted her more than any other. It was about a man named Jack whose ship sank in freezing water. There were not enough lifeboats for everyone. Jack found a piece of floating wood that could only hold one person. He gave it to a woman he barely knew and stayed in the water until he died from the cold. He could have saved himself. He chose not to. Read that story 3 times. Each time she felt her heart's aching in her chest. She learned about human wars as well. Not just individual battles, but entire conflicts that shaped their history. She studied something called World War II, a war that killed nearly 80 million people across their entire planet. She watched footage of soldiers storming beaches while enemies fired at them from fortified positions. She saw young men running straight into death because their friends were counting on them. She learned about the concentration camps, where millions of innocent people were murdered. And she learned about the humans who risked everything to stop it. Soldiers from dozens of countries had united to fight against evil. Many of them died far from home, in lands they had never seen, fighting for people they would never meet. Why would anyone do such things? The answer came slowly, piece by piece. Humans were fragile. They knew they were fragile. They had no armor, no claws, no venom. Their only natural weapons were their hands and their minds, and yet they had conquered their world and spread across the stars. They had done it by working together, by protecting each other, by believing that every life had value and that some things were worth dying for. Danny found her in the archive room late one night. She was surrounded by holographic images of human history. Her eyes were red from crying. "You have been in here for days," Danny said. "The captain is worried about you." Looked up at him. "I owe your species an apology." "For what?" "For thinking I understood you, for thinking you were like everyone else." She gestured at the displays around her. "I have studied many civilizations. I have heard many legends, but I have never seen anything like this." Danny sat down beside her. "We are just people, scared, flawed, short-lived people. We make mistakes all the time." "Yes, but when it matters, you rise above your fear. You become something more," shook her head slowly. "I watched the footage of your World War II. I saw soldiers charge into certain death to save their friends. I saw medics run through explosions to reach the wounded. I saw pilots crash their burning aircraft into enemy ships to protect their homes. Those were extraordinary circumstances." "No, that is what you do not understand," leaned forward. "For any other species, such behavior would be extraordinary. For humans, it is normal. It is expected. Your soldiers do not perform heroic acts because they are special. They perform heroic acts because that is what soldiers do. That is what you have been doing for thousands of years." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. "We are not heroes, Ambassador. We are just people who refuse to give up. That is exactly what makes you heroes." She stood and began gathering her notes. Her research was complete. She had learned everything she needed to know. The council was expecting a standard cultural report. They were expecting dry analysis and careful observations. They were expecting to hear that humans were a young species with nothing remarkable about them. They were going to be very surprised. Danny said, "I need to speak with Captain Palmer. I need to tell him something before we reach the—" "What do you need to tell him?" Looked at the holographic displays one last time. Images of courage and sacrifice flickered in the air around her. "I need to tell him that I finally understand. I need to tell him that I see the truth now." She turned to face Danny. "And I need to thank him for showing me." Danny nodded slowly. "He will be on the bridge. Come on, I will take you there." They walked out of the archive room together. Behind them, the holographic displays faded into darkness. But the stories remained. They would always remain. 6 months had passed since the battle aboard the Gallant Hope. Stood in the grand chamber of the council, surrounded by the most powerful leaders of her civilization. The chamber was vast and ancient, with walls carved from blue crystal and a ceiling that seemed to reach toward the stars themselves. Hundreds of council members sat in tiered seats, their eyes fixed upon her. She had been summoned to deliver her cultural assessment of humanity. It was a routine assignment. Every liaison who studied a new species was required to present their findings. The council expected a standard report. They expected data and analysis. They expected recommendations for diplomatic engagement. Intended to give them something else entirely. "Honored Council," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her heart. "I have served as a cultural liaison for 40 cycles. I have studied many species across the galactic arm. I have their histories, their customs, and their beliefs. In every case, I have found the same pattern." She paused to let her words sink in. Every species exaggerates its past. Every civilization inflates its heroes. The claim their ancestors moved mountains. The say their warriors fought for 20 days without rest. These are not lies. They are myths. They are stories that weak creatures tell themselves to feel strong. A few council members nodded in agreement. This was familiar territory. This was what they expected to hear. "I want to study humanity with the same expectations," continued. "I assumed their legends would be like all the others, tales of impossible courage, exaggerated sacrifice, heroes who never truly existed." She paused again. "I was wrong." The chamber grew very still. Human legends are not exaggerations. They are not myths. They are memories. Activated a holographic display. Images of the battle aboard the Gallant Hope appeared in the air before the council. 6 months ago, I witnessed human warriors in combat. I saw what they are truly capable of. She showed them Briggs, fighting through his wounds to kill 3 enemies before falling. She showed them Bate Harmon, holding a door closed with her bare hands to save strangers. She showed them Captain Palmer, standing calm and steady as his ship burned around him. These were not special soldiers, said. These were ordinary humans, engineers and doctors and young officers. And when the moment came, they became something extraordinary. A council member in the front row raised his hand. "Ambassador, every species fights to defend itself. What makes humans different?" Had been waiting for this question. Other species fight to survive. Humans fight for each other. They fight for strangers they have never met. They fight for ideals they may never see realized. And when they fall, others rise to take their place. She changed the holographic display. Now it showed images from human history, soldiers storming beaches, firefighters entering burning buildings, doctors walking into plague zones. I spent weeks studying their historical records. I found thousands of examples of humans sacrificing themselves for others, not rarely, not occasionally, constantly, throughout their entire history. Another council member spoke. "But they are so fragile, their bodies are weak, their lives are short. How can such creatures pose any threat to galactic power?" "That is exactly why they are dangerous," stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. "Humans know they are weak, they know they are mortal, and they have decided that if they must die, they will die for something that matters." She deactivated the display. "I have a warning for this council. Do not underestimate humanity. Do not dismiss their legends as fantasy. And whatever you do, do not make them your enemy." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Several council members looked offended. Others looked confused. A few looked genuinely worried. The eldest council member, a named coordinator, raised his hand for silence. "Ambassador," he said in a thin, ancient voice, "you speak as if humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Surely that is an exaggeration." "No, coordinator, it is not an exaggeration. It is an understatement." Took a deep breath. "Humans are not the strongest species. They are not the fastest or the longest lived. Their technology is not superior to ours. In a fair fight with equal numbers and equal weapons, we would defeat them." "Then what is the problem?" "The problem is that humans do not fight fair. They do not surrender when the odds are against them. They do not retreat when victory seems impossible. They keep fighting long after any rational species would have given up." She thought of Captain Palmer, sitting among the body bags in the cargo bay. "And they do it because they love each other. They fight for their families, their friends, their homes. They fight for people they have never met. They fight for ideas that may take centuries to achieve. Looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many council members as she could. There is nothing more dangerous than a human protecting something they love. Nothing in this galaxy. Nothing in any galaxy. I have seen it with my own eyes. I have watched it happen. She let the silence stretch for a long moment. My recommendation to this council is simple. Treat humanity with respect. Honor your agreements with them. Seek their friendship if possible. And never, under any circumstances, give them a reason to fight against you. Coordinator leaned forward. And if we ignore your recommendation, if we decide that humans are no threat to us? Thought about the 17 body bags. She thought about and Bait and all the others who had died so that strangers could live. Then I hope you have more soldiers than they do, because you will need every single one of them. She bowed to the council and walked out of the grand chamber. Behind her, the silence was absolute. The council members looked at each other with new uncertainty in their eyes. They had come expecting a routine report about a young and unremarkable species. Instead, they had received a warning. Whether they would heed it remained to be seen. Did not look back. She had done what she could. She had told them the truth. The rest was up to them. But as she walked through the crystal corridors of her, she found herself smiling slightly. She thought about Danny's easy grin. She thought about Palmer's tired, steady eyes. She thought about Bates' grease-stained fingers and his young face. She missed them, all of them. And she knew deep in her heart that she would return to the humans someday, not as a liaison, not as an observer, as a friend. Because that was what humans did. They made you care about them. They made you want to be better. They made you believe that even in a dark and dangerous galaxy, there were things worth fighting for. And that was the most dangerous thing about them of all.